Hello and welcome to today's Criterion Learning Series. My name is Steve Tompkins, Principal Solutions Architect with Criterion. Today I'll be showing compensation management in Criterion HCM. So let's go ahead and get started here. Let me go ahead and switch over to my browser. While I'm switching over, I do want to, of course, remind you that we do have a chat as well as a Q&A. So if you have any questions about what you're seeing today, or maybe something specific to your particular, instance, please let us know. You can send a message in the chat or the Q&A. Of course, you can also reach out to us, help@criterionhcm.com. We're happy to help you out. So you should be able to see my browser here. And while we will be into self-service to actually perform the compensation distribution, I do want to, of course, show you the setup of where that's all done. And I'm going to show you one that has a lot of the different configurations out there, as much as I can show here in the next 30 minutes. So what I'm going to do is hop over to my HR here, and I'll go ahead and show you the settings. So there's a lot, obviously, that can go into this. So the first thing is, are you going to use a performance review with your compensation distribution round? So just to set the table there, the distribution round can use the performance review scale, it can use a comp ratio, and it can use a combination of those two. Plus, it can have a location differential. So if you're going to use performance review, of course, you need to have a performance review configured. And of course, you're going to need to have those performance reviews completed to be able to show it on the distribution round. I'll show you that here as well. But you'll need to have a review period out here, like I have one. I'm not going to go into the full settings, but you need to have one to be able to use it. So you'll see that right there. As far as the comp ratio, of course, you're going to need to have a salary grade set up, or salary step set up, so it can calculate where the comp ratio is. And this is something we actually covered in our last session out there, is how to set up salary grades. But just as a reminder, what you would need to do is under code tables and user, I'll just type in salary. You'll need to have a few things. You may need to set up a salary group like I have here. For example, I have several, but here's like annual as an example. You will need to have at least one salary grade configured. I have several, but here you can see what these look like. They don't need to have the job titles. That's just what I've done here in my settings. And then, of course, you'll need to set up the salary grades themselves right here under HR administration. So if I go to that annual one as an example, I have two different job titles right there, minimum and maximum. So you can see what those numbers are in there. And of course, what we'll do is calculate the midpoint. As an example, to be 80,000. And then we're going to compare the employee's rate to that midpoint to calculate their particular comp ratio. So all of that would need to be configured. Now, it doesn't need to be configured like immediately before you set it up. You are going into the configuration of the system. It does need to be configured before you have your managers going and do the compensation distribution, because it is going to rely on those numbers. Now, you don't need to use the recommendations at all, in which case none of this is necessary. I'm just kind of going over what would be, what would be necessary if you were to be going in there. And then I did want to, kind of point out here, finally, on an employee, in order to calculate the compensation, the comp ratio, too many comp words here, comp ratio, you'll need to make sure that on their primary position, they have that salary grade there. So if you look at it here, assistant manager salary grade 70 to 90, he's at 80, so he's right at the midpoint. So he's going to be at 100 as far as the comp ratio is concerned. And so everybody who you're going to use the comp ratio needs to have that configured. All right, so those are kind of some of the settings in there. Now, of course, there's going to be a workflow as well. So let's look at where that is going to be configured, in case you're not familiar with the workflows. And right down here, the very last option under your system configuration is workflows. And I already have one configured here, but I'll just go into the settings so you can kind of see what that looks like here. Now, we've covered workflow configurations in previous webinars. And I don't remember the last one, but it's been this year we've done one. And so you'll see here, the workflow type, the group that it applies to. This might be different for different, locations or groups of employees, et cetera. Mine's going to be all my active employees. All right. And then what are the steps? Now, mine is very simple. The initiator, like the manager, would be initiator. And then in mine, the CEO is the approver. All right. Of course, yours may have different steps. You may have different ones for, different employees and so forth. So, or groups of employees. So yours could be, whatever you like there. All right. So that's kind of the settings within here. Now, of course, it's gonna be looking at employee data when we get to the actual process of this. So let's go ahead and look at the configuration of the compensation management. And there's three things in here. Now, you may not be using all of these. So for an example, you don't have to use a merit increase scale or location differential. You can jump right into a distribution round without looking at, say, the performance review scores or the comp ratio. So these are not requirements. But if you like to have the system recommend percentages to the managers, that's where that becomes important. Let's just quickly talk about the location differential here. So the location differential is saying that perhaps you're spread across a wide geographical area, and maybe let's just, as an example, maybe you've got some employees who are in San Francisco and you have other employees who are in Iowa City, Iowa. All right. So completely different cost of living areas and something like that. And of course, you can have as many locations as you need to. These are work locations. And of course, that means that you're probably going to pay the people in one area more just because of the cost of living versus other places. So, allows you to do that in there. So let's look at this here. You'll see the button to add here. So here you could choose one or more work locations. So let's just say New York as an example here. And of course, I could choose others. So I'll choose New York. And then you can give this a name. Now, the name could be the location. It could be New York, or maybe you want to say like Northeast or something like that, Eastern District, whatever. And then this is the differential. So 0 means there's no differential. You're just like, you're not going to adjust in the recommendations, not going to adjust it at all for the fact that they're in this region. Positive means you're going to give them a little bit more because they're in a place maybe with a higher cost of living. So maybe you do like, that's going to be a 5%. Oops, I think it's 0.05. 0.05% or 5% differential. Maybe it's in a place that's a little bit less expensive. You can do negative, 0.2 or something like that. So it'll be 2% less because in that area. So you could set this up if you need to do that. And of course, you could do this for one or several locations in one, or you do one for each location. Whatever you want to do, you can do that right there. So I'll do like 5% here. And then just to show you the difference, let's say Richmond. All right, and I'll call this Richmond. And let's just say it's 0. We'll say 0 for Richmond. And then, of course, you could do negative for some other ones. All right, but I'll just do that right there. All right, so just an example there. And of course, you'll see this active right here. If you do have any that are inactive, you can show them. And if you need to clone these for whatever reason, maybe, it's very similar in some, you like the setup, the actual number is correct, but you need to change the locations. Of course, you can use the clone button there. All right, so here you'll see, I'm going to show you a merit increase scale. And again, this is optional, but I want to show you what this looks like. And I actually have a couple here. One of them I haven't completed, which is this one. Oops, I put ration instead of ratio. And one that I have completed. So let's look at this one right here. So this is just a performance review scale. So I'm not looking at this. I'm not looking at the comp ratio. And you'll notice here, I'm not using the location differential as well. So, certainly I can do this here, and you'll notice here I've got those different rows. Now you can kind of ignore the column here because I'm not using the comp ratio. But if I was, you'll see here I can choose what am I using here. All right, so you give it a name, you choose what scores to use, and then you can set up the grid here. Now this is, you'll notice I could say use the location differential. So that would, bump or down based off of where they are. All right, so if you want to use that right there. Now, if this is in use by maybe another distribution round, and you now want to add comp ratio, you can't do that. You have to create a new one. So just be aware of that. And if you want to add comp ratio to an existing scale, unfortunately, you can't do that. So it's just kind of the way it is already in use. So we can't redo that right there. All right, so that's what one looks like. You'll see here, I added the different ranges that I'm doing. So all I would do is that initially when I come here, there's going to be one here that's blank. And I would click in and say, here's like the max score. So every score in the performance should be between 0 and 50%, including 50. So if it's at 50, we're going to do that. If I don't do this, it'll mean like 49.99999, and then 50 and above is the next level. Right. And then from 50, 50, a little above 50, 50.01 and higher to 60 is 2%, 3%, 5, 8, 12. I think you can see these here. Of course, the maximum is going to be 100%. You can't get more than 100% on a performance review. So you can't put in like 120%. All right, very easy. And of course, I could adjust these numbers if I needed to. You'll notice here I'm typing in again as decimals. So if I typed in 1, it's going to show it as 100. So just be aware of that. Don't put in the wrong percentage there. When you mean 1%, type in 0.01. All right, and I can tab. I'm actually doing that as it's going down, tabbing hit there. All right, so very easy to do that right there. Now let's look at one with a comp ratio. I fixed the spelling while we were looking here. All right, so now this one, what I've done is, of course, I still have the review scores here, but now I've got the comp ratio across the top here, and I can add other columns. So, I've got 0 to 60, 60 to 90, and 90 to 120. And of course, I could go like 120 to, 250 or something like that if I wanted to, go whatever number. It's very easy. Type in here, and let's say 250. All right, so just like the rows, you can add columns. And if you want to get rid of them, you'll notice here a little trash can. That gets rid of it. All right, and then you would go through and you would type in your numbers. So here you'll see like they're below the median. So maybe you're going to go a little bit higher. Maybe it'll do like 3%, 2%, 1%. All right, and I'll tab down here. So again, they're low, but their scores are a little bit better. So maybe 4%, 3%, 2%. And of course, whatever your percentages are. Now, these are going to be the recommendations. It's not going to be like automatically just apply this across the board. This is going to show to the manager a recommendation. So again, let me just go through here. I'll do like 6%, 5%, and 4%. And I'm just going to keep going down my list here. And finally, I'm going to do a nice big one, 12%, 11%, and 10%. All right, so you can see very easy to fill this out. Doesn't take much effort. Again, you're typing it in as a decimal and it's converting it to a percentage. So you'll see that right there. And of course, click save when you're done. All right, so again, if you're using these, right, you need to do that setup before you get to the distribution round, which is the actual what you're going to have the managers perform to show those show the managers their employees and do the recommendations. So I don't have any set up. I do have an older one, I believe. Yeah, some older ones that are out here, but I don't have one right now. So I'm going to go ahead and add one. Of course, this is by employer. So if you have multiple employers, you'll have to do this for different employers possibly. And of course, you could do this as different groups of employees as well. So I'm just going to call this 2025 merit increases. Okay. How do I want to show the pay rate to the performers? And you can choose these different things here. Now, the pay rate on an employee, as you may have seen, I might have it as annual. Maybe I got it as 80,000, but I want to show it as hourly because everybody knows those numbers as hourly, or maybe vice versa. You got hourly employees, but it's easier to see them in an annual or monthly or some other frequency here. So you can choose that right here. All right, here's the workflow to approve it. You'll notice this is a requirement, and all these fields are requirements here. This is the start date of when people are going to actually start doing this review. And maybe this is like January 1st, and you go for a while. It could be like January 1st to the 31st, and it's effective February 1st, something like that. So you could put in, whatever date range. Of course, you could use the calendar. I'm just going to for demo purposes here, do a really big one. So I get the entire year here, 9/30/25, and I'm going to say it's effective 10/1/25. Of course, you may not be doing it this big because this leaves it open during this entire time frame. Now, maybe the manager finishes it within a week or so, but it would leave it potentially open for a whole year here if they didn't actually submit it. So just be aware of that date range there. This is when they actually can complete the distribution round. All right, so here you'll see I've got some numbers here for the salary as well as the budget. I can choose the pool or the budget for my increases or decreases, of course. But here's how much I'm going to allocate of the current total salary. So it's looking at everybody's pay rates and who are active and saying, okay, 7,681,204.80. So maybe you have a number in mind and you say it's going to be $1 million. You can just type that in there. Maybe you're not sure and you say, oh, you know what, we can afford 10% increase. So you just type in 10. All right, now it's going to be 10%. And you'll see, of course, it calculated 10% of the above. Now, I can't override this and have it stay as 10%. It's going to recalculate it. If I typed in 800,000, it's going to now calculate as like 10 point something percent. So I'll give you an example there. All right, same type of thing for bonus. Now, if I leave this blank, it means I don't want to do bonuses on this particular round. And maybe that's true. Maybe you don't do bonuses along with merit increases. Maybe you do them separately. But if you do them together, you can put a bonus pool over here. And you'll notice, of course, it says new salary budget. So it added this plus this to get that number. All right. How much bonus? Let's just say 500,000. Right. And that is being 6% of the budget for that. All right. And again, I could do 0 here and have nothing. But I could also type in 6%. So very simple to do that right there. Now, you'll notice here, this is not a requirement. In fact, none of these fields are requirements here. I don't need to set a budget and everything like that. I could just skip over to the managers and the employees. All right. So here I can tell it which increase scale that I need to, or I want to use. And of course, that's why I needed to set it up first. So let's just use merit and comp ratio as an example. All right. And then do we allow them to go over to the budget that's going to be allocated to the managers on the next screen? So if I give the manager $50,000, do I allow them to go over that budget? Maybe they can justify why they're going over the budget or not. So the default is to say no, don't allow them to go over. So if I try to go to 50,000 at 1 cent, it would stop it and not allow me to submit that because it's over the budget. All right, same thing with the bonus. All right, now here are various columns you may want in the grid. Now the grid's going to have a lot of columns already. It's going to have things like their name, their job title. It's going to have the new amount and stuff like that. But you can choose what other columns do you want to add to this. All right, and as you can see, there's a bunch of columns you might add into this particular thing here. So just be aware of that. Is you're going to be using something like with the comp ratio, you may want to show the person what is the comp ratio for this current person. So that way they know why somebody maybe is offered a higher percentage than somebody else who's getting a very similar score on their performance review. So you may choose to use that. So all you do is you just, click on the ones you wanted. Let's say I want to choose the comp ratio. Now you may notice our annual rate and hourly rate. Remember what I chose in the previous one. I chose to show it as annual, but I can also now show it as hourly. So if I do want to see them side by side, I have that option there. So I can show that. And maybe you're doing monthly and you want to show annual and hourly. So you can choose all 3 columns if you like. I'm going to choose hourly. All right. And if you like, you can show like the last change amount. So, maybe they got a raise last year. You don't remember how much it was or the percentage. You may choose to add those in there. And I'm hoping the people I selected have had changes. If not, they'll just be blank. It's okay. It just means they haven't had a change. Right. And let me just see here. I added the comp ratio. Maybe I do want to show the minimum and maximum. I could do that. Or maybe I want to show the salary grade range. Just remember, if I add all of these columns, it's going to be really wide. So somebody might need a big screen, or then you scroll around to see all of the columns. So I would definitely recommend not adding every column. Unless you're just like in your sandbox, you want to see what they all look like. But you may not want every column just because it could get very, think of it a really wide spreadsheet, basically. All right, here I like these 2 because this allows you to say, all right, if I give this guy, $1,000, what's his pay rate going to be? And so you can add that. And then, what's his comp ratio going to be? So that might help you decide those things. So I'm going to add these. Of course, I could add others. The one thing is that once I've saved this, I can't come back and add columns. So just what I'd recommend is try it out like in a sandbox environment, see does it have all the columns you want, and then make sure you're doing that, because if you forget a column, you add too many columns, you can't remove them. All right. So the next step is to choose the org structure that you're going to use for what we're calling the managers. It doesn't need this could be team lead, and this could be I don't know, ELT member or something. It doesn't need to be called manager. We just named it manager here, but mine happened to be called manager and supervisor. Yours may have completely different names. I'm going to choose manager. And then I'm going to look for everybody who is a manager of somebody. And you'll see all these people have people reporting to them in that manager org structure. So this isn't all my employees. These are the employees who have at least one person reporting to them. All right, I'm just going to choose Ted for simplicity. And here I can set my budget. Of course, if I added others, I could add, Ted and, let's say Megan or something like that. I could add whoever I like to that. Let's just add 2 people. So now I can set their budgets. You'll see here it's telling me the total salary for that person, the number of people that report to them. And so I can see those numbers here. And that might be helpful to say, all right, I want to give a bigger pool to Ted because he has a lot more people, a lot more salary than Albert does. So maybe I give him 250,000, and ends up being 32% of the overall pool. And this person, because they only have 10 people, maybe I only do 100,000. Okay, so you'll see how I can do that right there. And then same type of thing with bonus. If I'm doing bonuses, I can set a bonus pool. All right, finally, I'm going to add the employees that are going to go through this. So they don't need to do all of them. There might be some you're not going through for whatever reason. Maybe they just started, so you're not going to do a merit increase, a week after they've started. So you can go here and add in whoever you like. I'm going to just pick 2 that I have set up here. So I know Chris is one, and there's another one. Could have sworn I set him up. Let me just make sure. I don't see him here, so maybe he's on the second page. There he is. All right, I know I've done these 2 performance reviews, or at least one of them. So I've added those 2 folks right there. I can also just choose to add all or groups of employees if I want to. And here you'll see I've got a couple options. One is I can save this, in which case it's not submitted and it's not ready for anybody to do anything. Or I can go through and submit it. This allows you to maybe go back and add people you need to, or make some changes if you had to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and submit that there. All right. Here, this little eye allows me to see what's going on so far, the setup and what people have done. So here you can see like Chris, I've not done anything, of course, because I just started it, but here's the people and everything. So it allows like HR to kind of review what's happening there. Now let's see the actual performance of this over here. We got a few minutes left. So I'm going to go back over to self-service and just hit refresh. And I got a notification email that I heard in my headset here. But here you can see is this. Here's the notification. Oh, I don't have self-service notifications. I only have the email notification turned on for it. So I got the email one letting me know that it's available. But here is this right here. All right. Now, all of my employees would be listed here. And here are all my people. Now, one of the things is you may not like the order of these columns right now, or you want to, hide one temporarily or something like that. So let's say, for an example, I want the future pay rate to be over here after the merit amount. That way I can kind of see, okay, you've got 80, type in a number, now here's the new amount. And maybe I also want to see the future comp ratio as well. You'll see, just drag and drop the columns however you like. Once you're satisfied, you click this to save. All right. And so I can do that right there. So here's this current salary, and maybe the current salary I leave right there. There's the hourly rates. The last change you'll see here that they both had increases last year, and here's how much the amounts were and the percentages and so forth. And I can see that right there. Now, I did not put the performance review score on here, so that was my mistake. But I know they went through performance reviews, or at least one of them did. So I'm going to have it calculate the recommended increase amount, and it'll end up being right there. All right, so I'll go ahead and do that right there. And oh, you know what? They don't actually, maybe I didn't actually complete their performance reviews in there. But what it would show, and I apologize, it's not showing here. I thought I had completed their performance reviews, is it would show a number. So let's just say, he's right at the middle of the copper ratio, but let's say he got a really high score. Maybe it would recommend 10, 12% in here based off of that round, that merit scale I set up. When I hit this number, it would fill in this with the number from this column. That's all that does, is it takes the number that's in this column and pops it into here. All right, so if this said 10, it would then say 10 over here. Oops, 10. We typed 10 instead of 1. All right, 10. All right, and then maybe this one, maybe you got a really high score, a really low score, or something like that. Maybe let's just say he gets an 8, but his copper ratio is a little bit lower, so that might have been a bump up. So you'll see how I've got like the comp ratio, he's got a 96 versus he's got a 100. So this might be a little bit higher based off of that scale that I set up. All right, now you'll see here, I can also type in the numbers. This will recalculate the percentage, just like we did in the setup there. So if I type in, I see his salary here. Maybe I say, I really like Chris, and I'm going to give him $8,200. Of course, now recalculated at 10.25%. And then I really, really like Nate, and I'm going to say 6,000 right here. All right, so he's going to get 11%. So you can type in those things. Of course, I can also override it and say, maybe I'm just going to do 9% for him, and right there. And of course, as you can see, as I go through here, it's showing the new amounts right there. So 80,000 plus 7,200 is 87,200. All right, 53 plus 6,000. So you can see how it's adding those in there and showing those numbers. All right, now I didn't do a location differential, but that could also be a column that shows here. And as you can see, I'm having to scroll back and forth because I've added a lot of columns right so far. And maybe I don't really, I look at these numbers and say, yeah, okay, I kind of agree with that. Let me just hide a column. I don't need it. Boom, I can hide it and then save that. Yes, this is interesting information, but let's just hide the amount. That's not as important to me, like that. All right, so very simple to look at those numbers now. And I can resize columns too, to an extent. I can't go less than, like I can't shrink it less than a certain size. But if you did want to see something a little bit wider, of course you could do that there. Now I put these numbers in and I can save what I've done so far. Maybe I want to revisit this. I've only done some of them. Maybe you've got like 30 and you've only done some, you got to go run off to a meeting. Of course, you can save that. And then when I come back over here as, let's say, HR, I can see what this person is doing. If they've submitted, I would be able to see those numbers over there. All right, now I've got, of course, the effective date and stuff like that. So when I go ahead and submit this, I've got a signature enabled, so I can sign it or use my signature that's saved. When I submit this, what will happen is there will be a approval process. I think it said the CEO. So I'd have to log in as a CEO to go ahead and approve that. And then there is a final step here where I can, let me just hit refresh here, where I can process it. So after all of the managers are done, I can process it, which will go through and update all of the employees. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to hit this. Here, I should be able to see there's the numbers. And once they're all submitted, I can then process, or excuse me, all approved, I can then process it, which will go through and update everybody who's got a change. Now, if there's no change, of course, there's not going to be a process that goes and updates them. So if there's somebody that they decide hit 0 for whatever reason, like I said, maybe they just got an increase, last month, maybe they don't need it. You're not going to give them another one because they just got one, or maybe they just started or something. It's not going to process a change for them. Okay, so I know I went very quickly. I saw there were a few questions out there that were answered, including a new CFR, which is great. We've improved this many times. I think it's the third or fourth time we've done compensation management because we keep adding new things based off of your feedback. So if you do have some ideas on how we can make this better, please submit those as CFRs. Let me remind you where that can be done. Right here in admin, you can hit the little question mark and then right here, submit it. In fact, I should be able to see the one that was just submitted. I saw the chat go through. Right there, Lacey. Thank you for submitting that. In fact, three people have already voted for it. That's awesome. And so we do take this very seriously. We're going to look at this and get into the roadmap because obviously it's awesome. This is a great idea. I'll read it. Didn't get a chance at all, but we definitely go through here and add these things into the system. As you probably are aware, if you're here, you've probably been doing these before. um, we keep making this better. And so we are definitely looking for more ideas on how we can make this better. One I've heard recently is doing a scale for bonuses. So that might be one you want to submit as a CFR as well, a bonus increase scale. Anyways, so let's look at our upcoming schedule. Somewhere out there, I can't see that. Hang on one moment here. I might have accidentally closed my PowerPoint. There it is. Okay. So our upcoming schedule of events. Now, I do want to mention it's not here because it's not a learning series webinar, but the Criterion team is going to be at HR Tech next week. So if you happen to be going to HR Tech, hopefully it's not because you're looking for anything new, but maybe you're looking for something that we don't do now. If you happen to be there or you just like to see the latest technology out there in HR, we'll have a booth there. Go ahead and reach out to us, find us there. We'll be there all 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So if you're going to be there, I hope to see you there. I'll be there along with our sales team and stuff like that. So we'll be happy to say hi. But here's what's upcoming for the learning series webinars. So in a couple of weeks here, we're going to revisit notifications. It's been a while, so I want to make sure we understand how those work and how you can modify them and make them your own. So we're going to cover that. And then we're going to go into recruiting. So in October, we're going to be recruiting heavy there. So we're going to talk about open positions and candidates and the new things that have happened since the last time we covered those. And of course, we do have more coming later this year. I know that we published those, and a lot of it's payroll and year-end focused. So that's where we're going to be going there. I think during the next one, we'll announce the rest of the year's schedule. If not that one, then definitely the first one in October, we're going to announce the rest of the year's schedule. So I hope to see you all again in a couple of weeks, or if you happen to be at HR Tech, I hope to see you there. If not, thank you for joining me today. If you do have more questions, of course, you can reach out to us at help@criterionhcm.com. We're always here to answer those questions for you. If you're working with a partner, of course, you can reach out to your partner. They should be able to answer those questions as well. And I do want to thank you again for joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.